Okay, welcome to another episode of Learning for Truth and Love. I am really thrilled to have our guests today. We have Mrs. Cheryl Poe and Dr. Kathryn Wiley here joining us today. I let's just say I can't resist giving you a little background here because Dr. Wiley used to be my office mate. We used to share an office, which was awesome. But I am going to ask you guys to start by introducing yourselves. So please tell us about yourself before we get started and talking about your amazing work.
Oh, you wanna go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Poe, and I am the executive director founder of Advocating for Kids. We are a Virginia Beach based nonprofit that provides services nationally. And I identify as a neurodivergent, and I have raised two Black male sons that were also neurodivergent. And through my own personal experiences, I decided to learn everything I could possibly learn about special education advocacy. And once my kids graduated from high school successfully, both of them went into some form of college. I have spent my last, I'd say, 25 years learning and absorbing as much as I can about special education advocacy and making sure that the Black voice, the Black neurodivergent experience is respected within the community.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathryn Wiley. I'm an assistant professor at Howard University in the Education, Leadership, and Policy Studies department. And for about the last 10 years, I have been working on research connected to school discipline, school safety, and school climate. And a lot of that has focused on racial inequality. Folks familiar with those areas of work, or for those who might be, just getting interested in them, the intersection with special education is a really important one. And that's part of how I came to this work. And I'm a qualitative researcher by training. So, doing a lot of interviews and case studies and working with different organizations like Miss Pose to explore these kinds of issues.
Well, well, thank you both. I'm so curious. Well, for the audience who are not familiar with what neurodivergent means, Cheryl, could you just explain what that is?
So, a neurodivergent brain are people who have a form of what's called a disability within that is a brain-based disability, such as ADHD, which or executive functioning, which affects the frontal lobe of your brain, transmitters not quite connecting. Autism is also highly, a brain based also kind of disorder that they call neurodivergence, meaning the neurological aspects of our brains function different than what is considered a typical brain neurological functioning. Instead of saying a person with a disability, again, our language in our policies and things haven't caught up. But referring to yourself as a neurodivergent just acknowledges that the way that you process information and think and function in this world is different
Mm-hmm.
than neurotypical.
Okay.
Same thing as saying that you have a disability. I think it's just a more accurate description of what's going on with you.
Okay. Awesome. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Catherine?
No.
So I'm curious. I'm so curious about this new report you guys did that came out sharing your findings for your research. But before you do that, considering that they're neurovergent kids from so many different backgrounds, I'm so curious why advocate for kids in terms of your focus is on Black kids. Why is that important? And why this work even though people advocate for neurodivergent kids in general?
Um Well, as a America's racist, we have to be honest about that. You know, uh, let's be honest about where we are in our society. Public education was never meant for Black Americans, whether you were a neurodivergent or typical or a genius, right? We literally had laws that had to be put in place to allow Black children to even go to integrated public schools where they can really have access to top quality resources, or at least resources equal to their white counterparts.
Hmm.
Even Black teachers before Brown versus the Board of Education, they weren't getting paid equal. They
Mhm.
weren't having access to the same kinds of resources and tools to educate the community that they were responsible for educating, and they did a wonderful job with what they had. So let's be honest about how this system, this education system was never meant for us as a Black person. And then let's jump to 1970s where we talk about our neurodivergent or students with disabilities because they weren't going into or allowed to be integrated into public schools until after Brown versus the Board of Education. Then there was a case in Pennsylvania where they sued to say, hey, children with disabilities have a right to access public education. Before that, they were institutionalized. So if you are Black and you have a disability, there literally had to be two specific laws created just for you to step your foot into the system. So the system was never developed for you. Let's be honest,
Yeah.
And then ever since Black children have been in public schools, policies, school board policies, these code of conducts were developed in a way that penalizes them, that weaponizes them, that pushes them into the school to prison pipeline. And then when you add the idea that, oh, my brain's different on top of the stereotypes that exist within the educational system and expect our children to be treated fairly, well, that's not common sense. That's not
Mhm.
logical. So, what I've learned in my work, and like I said, I've been doing this for years. And I worked in, I was part of those structures, like, your larger, well known disability equity, special
Mhm.
education kinds of organizations. But
Yeah.
their focus ignored, and there was not representation of Blacks, Black neurodivergence, or even a Black voice. And then when
Mm.
the Black voice was there, it was trying to be tokenized, not used to make sure that the services that you're providing to your community
Mhm.
include information that supports, a particular population, which are Black folks.
Mm.
Um, so the idea of the reality largely is
Mhm.
because no one else is, even though they know that our students are hurting. Everybody will do research. Everyone will report on. Everyone will list a statistic about how Black kids are suspended 3 times greater than a white kid, but you're never hearing that follow up that's really concrete in the disability world on what are
Mhm.
we going to do to protect that Black neurodivergent student who is also being suspended more than their typical white neurodivergent student.
Mm.
So even though some of the answers are kind of obvious, the research really dug down, I think, and Kathryn, please jump in. There were so many things that were discovered that I didn't anticipate. So for me, that's extremely exciting that, like, of
Mhm.
course, the typical things were there. Racism. The parents believe they faced racism. The parents believe that they were intimidated, those kinds of pieces. But there was so much more rich information about the processes and what they believed they needed to support them
Mm.
that was exciting to me. So I know the reason why the research is being done is because as a Black neurodivergent, somebody that had an IEP growing up, our voice needs to be respected equally to the white organizations. And to quite be honest, there are a lot of Latinx or English as a second language funding federally where that population can get support, at least in the state of Virginia, but there's nothing equivalent to that for the Black culture.
Mm.
So our voices, I mean, it's like we know it exists, but we don't care. So we're doing it, and we're doing it then in a way that we're going to use that information to ensure that our community and those who care about our community and want to ally with us
Wow.
can access.
Thank you. Reminding me of why I focus on Black representation. So, what about you, Catherine? Why is this work important to you?
Yeah, well, um, I mean, I think about so many things came to mind, including, I mean, some of the history, right? Because Cheryl talked, and we talk a lot about the history of desegregation. And, I think something that many folks don't know, at least in the state of Virginia, is that in 1957, Virginia opened up the Pupil Placement Board. And this pupil placement board was basically, charged with deciding who, where students would be assigned, enrolling, and placement decisions around that after Brown. And, the criteria that was used to evaluate these assignments included ability, included things like IQ, included right. And so, I mean, with the racism and segregation, you have segregationists essentially running a pupil placement board. These criteria that are supposed to be objective but are not, and so you can begin to see how the intersection of racism and ableism it shows up there as well. Like it's part of this connected history of Brown.
Mhm.
There's actually a researcher down at I think the University of Richmond who she has been doing a historical study on the intersection of racism and ableism in this pupil placement board in Virginia and look at how those decisions were made, how the language, we
Mhm.
still today in school discipline referrals, we often talk about biased language, anti-Black language, ways that it
Mhm.
criminalizes Black youth and children. And she actually looks from a historical standpoint at the description language of Black children who, related to these placement decisions. Essentially, there had to be like a profile on the student written that was submitted to the board that would petition them to go to an integrated school, and they could be denied based on not meeting the admission criteria. Um, if there were any kind of behavioral offenses or any kind of behavioral record, if their IQ score wasn't high enough, right? And so I mean, these are such old, white supremacist, segregationist kinds of criteria. We think about eugenics and the eugenics movement, but I think that, you know, this history and helping people understand that the relationships between these things are so much older and they intersect right in, the infamous Brown decision that we often look to.
Mhm.
It's an important part of the history. And I mean, for me personally, I will never forget the first time that I walked into a middle school that had what's called an affective needs center. And
Mm.
I can still picture myself walking through the foyer of this big, beautiful 120-year-old building and walking to the back of the school. And there was this closed door that was locked and shouldn't have been next to the school resource officer's office, which
Mhm.
signals something, right? And I will never forget walking into that room and seeing an all Black classroom, so junior. So, I mean, just out of college,
Mhm.
a young white woman seeing this was supposedly a special education classroom and just seeing the that kids in there were not getting an education. There was
Mhm.
nothing about that space that was educative. That there
Mhm.
was nothing, the teacher, she was not offering instructional lesson. The kids were not getting the services, or educational opportunities they needed. It was so abhorrent. And that district has since come under civil rights investigations. The state got involved. There were actually, I think, some criminal investigations, but I'll never forget that. And when I
Mm.
saw that, and when I saw it through a race conscious lens, knowing that if these were white kids in this classroom, this would never be allowed. The fact
Mhm.
that young Black children, particularly, and in this it was an all predominantly white school, predominantly white staff. And there were Black staff members, but the situation they were in was so tenuous. But seeing that, I think it just forever changed me.
Wow.
This if these were white kids in this room, this would never be permitted.
Mhm.
Ever since that time, it just has been really important to me to put the specter on inequality and to put it
Mm.
on those systems, those schools, those staff members, those
Right.
the district knew, the staff members knew, they put their youngest teachers in that
Mhm.
room. They put their youngest teachers with students who need
Mhm.
support. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but that memory, it's still so powerful to me,
Mhm.
and, I still there's a part of me that still wants vengeance. You know that those kids will never get that time back.
Yeah.
Um,
My gosh.
and in that situation, we found out parents were notified after the fact.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it was all sorts of horrible. And so that's what brings me to this work, and particularly this intersection of it.
Wow.
Can I just follow up? Catherine, you just said something that kind of reminded me and goes to more synchronicity around our relationship about vengeance, feeling it. Because to be honest, I mean, yes, all those other things are absolutely true. I had an IEP growing up. I wasn't reading on grade level, all that good stuff. However, the point that I'm an advocate, it's a story around it's about vengeance. It's about how dare you say that to me? And it's so funny because my son's elementary school, I got a case. I had not had a case in there in years, and I actually got a case that came up. But part of what I do and my passion comes from, I think, vengeance to a degree of, I was told that when my son had a speech delay that, they wanted to stop his speech therapy services because they were saying I speak Black English to him at home. And that's why he was having a disability. And that kind of trauma kind of similar to what, Catherine experienced in a different light,
Mhm.
seeing that, recognizing, you know, Black children are being harmed because of someone else's biased.
Yeah.
And like you said, the idea of revenge, people may think that that's bad or mean, but I think not when you turn it into something as beautiful as our report,
Mm-mm. Well,
right? Because it is a form of revenge. It's like,
It is.
don't say that to anybody else again.
wow. Or justice, right? Because, it's I want to point this out too because, I have segued into looking at work on what we call motivated thinking. And so I think there are people who would like to see this as revenge, right? To turn it into something negative, to take away the humanistic aspect, right? Because and I know Catherine, you call it a race conscious. I think, you're being human there too, right? You're being human. You're someone who is connected to someone else's humanity, right? And you look at it and you realize, wow, if this was somebody who looked like me, if it's somebody who was white, this wouldn't happen. And you hit it on the nail there. This is why this is important. And I've seen this repeatedly too. If this was somebody who was white, you wouldn't have to go after this. And what I find so amazing is the fact that people still think that they fooled everyone into thinking that this is fair, right? That this was created without bias. It's like, what a joke, right? What a
Right.
joke. And who would ever think of that? I mean, you're talking about, and it's fascinating too, because when you look back in history, even before 1607, we were in this, I think it was 1606, I have to check the date. It was definitely before 1609. We were in a similar place here, right? We're in a very similar place to where we are now, even though and when I talk about, I'm not talking necessarily about the educational piece. I'm talking about happenings that people are so surprised by, right? Because we pretend that we pretend that we're in an environment that's fair, right? Because that's a narrative we like to give. But before I get into, I'm so curious about your report. So, how did you guys meet? How do you come to be working together on this awesome project?
Catherine, you go ahead and share.
Story are
Yes.
we came together. It really probably has been okay. So I just started my fourth year here at Howard. And I think, had one of our very first conversations the first year that I was here. And by here I mean I had moved from Denver, Colorado. I'm originally from Dayton, Ohio, and I lived out west for a while, and then I moved here in 2022. And we're part of a national school discipline. It's called the Federal School Discipline and Climate Coalition. It's a great organization. They've got some good resources on their website. They bring together civil rights advocates, lawyers, et cetera, to talk about issues, really prioritizing Black and Brown children and civil rights issues in schools around discipline. So, and special education. And so we were on this call together, and I had just moved to Virginia. And Catherine, one of the things you and I have talked about is over over my time, I've really enjoyed doing really action research projects because you can't just do research and observe it. I really believe that that the the power and privilege that you have in documenting something means you have to do something with it. Um, so, you know, I really then that's the kind of work that I like to do. So we were on this call together, and I think Cheryl had said something like, "Oh, I'm in Virginia," and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm in Virginia," because I am from Ohio. And Ohio, you just talk to everybody, and like once you find a connecting point, you want to meet everyone, and so I think I put in the chat like, "Oh, I'd love to get to know you," and then I'll let Cheryl take it from here. But
Yeah, it was, well, definitely fate. We were meant to meet. And it, like, all of that, and then we just started, and then she reached out and she said where she was and what she did, and I was like, "Oh, this is who I am. I'm in Virginia.
Mhm.
These are," and I think I pitched like, "These are concerns that we have here in Virginia,
Mhm.
blah 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 blah." And then it came up, I don't even know, like, it was the research committee at the time that we were having the meeting. That's what it was. So that within that research committee, you guys were all talking about possible research subjects, I think.
Mm.
And I don't think mine got selected in the big part of the conversation, but we were talking back and forth, and she said that she would be interested in it, and I told her who I was, what my company did, how I'd love to do a research project around the needs of Black neurodivergence or students receiving special aids in the state of Virginia. I had
Mhm.
shared with her that there were some other research reports that other organizations had done, but they weren't really doing anything around it. And within advocating for kids, I really wanted to be able to have like good factual data, research
Mhm.
based information to develop a curriculum that was specific for people that look like me, called
Mm.
Advocating While Black, because it's an experience and it's a statement too. You got driving
yeah,
while black, all this. And I love the one book from the professor, Learning While Black, I think it was, out of Ohio. I can't think of her name now, doctor, whatever. But so that's kind of how the conversation started. So Kathryn, so we worked on our first research kind of summary where she looked at all the research that had been already kind of collected around the needs of students overall with special education in Virginia, but also Black students. Virginia, too, at the time was still under federal monitoring because they were having some issues with the special education program
Mm.
overall. And then,
Mhm.
of course, when they fix it, they only fix it from a white lens. So that's
Mhm.
another piece of why I was like, ooh, if you could work with her, that would be wonderful.
Mhm.
And then from there, after she did the first report, I was able to secure some grants to make it even bigger. So we got some funding initially from Dignities in School to kind of start the process. Then we got a really nice grant from Nickel, which is, I was, tell me the full, what is it? They're going to get me. You got to say the right name.
yeah.
National Youth.
Youth Law Center for youth.
Yes. National yes. We got a really nice grant from them. And then after we got like started with it, we were able to pull in some additional funding from ARC that provided some support. So it literally, I believe it was something that was meant to be, because once we started it, and even though we did have a couple bumps in the beginning with getting funding enough to really start, things seem to kind of come in place, like kind of just seem to happen to allow this process to work. And then, of course, the university, Howard's, Kathryn being able to do her time with this and her resources, so, Howard being a main piece of wanting, and in Kathryn's group, honoring this kind of work. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how it happened, right? It was, it was wonderful.
It is. Over the last 2 years, we've really been able to nurture a lot of different things through it. Um, for example, I mean, Cheryl and I have written either op-eds and I think the 74 million it was
Yeah.
published,
Mhm.
spoken on different podcasts about to raise the issue, that Black parents confront these dynamics, biases around race and special education and ableism in
Mhm.
in advocacy and in the special education process.
Mhm.
So being able to share it for even prior to our research findings, just being able to share and uplift these issues as they exist, so through these different avenues. And then with the research report, which we really just finally got drafted, drafted our findings, we sent out to some peer reviewers that we know, some faculty members and advocates who work in this space. And, we've been able to share it to different audiences. And we have a team of 4 students and former current and former students at Howard. We have an ODU, Old Dominion University student working on this. And each of those students has been touched and impacted by this process. And
Mhm.
that has been so beautiful to see also. So
Wow.
it's really been, I think, a it's really nurtured a lot of awareness and opportunity, through the report itself and the work focused on Black parents and Cheryl's, the workshops that have been held in that regard.
Yes.
The students, Black young, junior Black scholars who are coming up through this work professionally, and I think the broader awareness around it. So it's really been this kind of creation that, has, I think, touched a lot of people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I had no idea it would be so, powerful in so many ways and the interest.
Mhm.
I was on a podcast the other day and it was with a white male and I've known him for a long time and he
Mhm.
asked me and he's like, I noticed your work is been more focused on the needs of the black student, like kind of what changed because I think I was race neutral before. And I feel that, you know, my response is because I realize being race neutral hurts my community. It doesn't allow for me to then do projects like this and center a weakness and a need that is so great.
Wow.
And I think that this research builds on my confidence of making that decision too.
Mhm.
But, I think for me, when we did our launch, you're talking about the launch we did, and it was around the executive summary, and that
Mhm.
was hosted here in Norfolk by a company called Black Brand, an organization. One of the things that I loved was the pride, seeing the pride in the students' face as they're reporting out about the work. It was just like you could tell that they weren't just reporting like words, that they were really like feeling the
Mhm.
experiences that were being shared. And then also we had the opportunity for some of the parents because again, it was blind. The students didn't know who these people were, right? Who at all, right? They're just seeing this.
Mhm.
And then we had like after the students reported, we had some of the parents kind of talk about the experiences. So it was a wonderful opportunity for parents to see the people behind the research and how they valued their
Mhm.
stories, cared about their stories, which
Wow.
empowered them. But then I think the students being able to see how they lend voice to the
Mhm.
voiceless
Mm.
was also powerful. So it was wonderful. It really
Wow.
was.
That's awesome. So, Catherine, I'm curious. I know you said, was this part of an action research? Can you tell us a little bit about the research side of things? And, if you do the research
Yeah, yeah.
aspect in terms of data collection, or academicians are interested.
I mean, to me, this has been an action research project.
Okay.
Academics love to quibble over, does this constitute that, et cetera. But to me, this has been an action project, an action research project, because this information, I think, it's been a participatory action research project. Like this isn't just university researcher doing this work, right? This is
Mhm.
us teaming up. Cheryl founded her consultancy and has been doing this professionally for so long and is such an expert in the field, and bringing together then, university faculty member, myself, and really partnering. I mean, and I would say, I mean, Cheryl has led a lot of, I think, the vision around the project, and we have collaborated on all the steps along the way.
Mhm.
So me bringing the research background, and helping to leverage the university resources. I think that's an important part of a researcher's responsibility, is to use institutional resources, for opportunities for justice when where and when you can.
Mhm.
Coming together in this way, um, I mean, it's just been, really been able to, I think, rise to that level, because through the process, we have engaged not just us two. right? We haven't just designed this ourselves, bringing our different lenses and areas of expertise, but we've also engaged. We must have talked with, I
Yes.
think, probably 3 or 4 experts who work in special education,
Mm,
neurodivergence, autism, who really focus on, Black families and children,
mhm,
and had, we co-created interview questions. We had them review the interview guides, make suggestions around language, terminology, questions to ask, etc. So we
mhm,
really got a lot of people involved, and I
mhm.
think that's what makes this project
Nice.
so great is that, we really had a lot of eyes on it. We had
Mhm,
Mhm.
on it who were prioritizing Black children and families, and who know the nuances of special education, who could come together and give us feedback.
mhm.
And now some of those same folks are now getting back our findings and being able, we're doing essentially a review process of, please give us feedback on this, what's right, what did we get wrong, etc. And finally, the last piece that I think is one of the most important pieces is that parents themselves, at the end of the draft report, basically we created a very short summary that contained, our highest level patterns and themes that we found. And from the research side, we wanted to check with parents, like, does this align on the whole, with your story?
Mm,
Be yourself story. Did we get it right? We essentially wanted to, did we get it right? And so we were able to hear back from parents who said, "Wow, look at this. Look at this. This you did get it right." And when we talked to
awesome.
parents in Norfolk, that was the question, that I was often asking people, did we do right by your story? Did we get this
Mm,
right? What kinds of changes or what kinds of is there anything that we overlooked?
mhm,
So I think that's important because researchers tend to, make assumptions, we tend to articulate, put together our findings and then never let the people that we spoke to actually weigh in on them. And there's a democratization of the research process that I think is really important and is an ethical position for myself
mhm,
to uphold. And so that I think is what, research design or action research design can look like too.
mhm,
If and in the future it would, we could work into evolving this into having parents participate in the construction, and
mhm.
there's definitely levels to participate.
Absolutely.
I also love that Cheryl and I also represented, an HBCU and an advocacy organization
Mhm,
collaborating on a participatory action research project, which I think is a really important part of this as well. So that's, I guess, some of the things from the research side and the scope of sort of what we've been doing over the last, really 2 years, because bringing all those people together, getting these different feedback sessions, I mean, the
mhm,
process has been really honest.
mhm. That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Looking at how systemic inequities in Virginia's school impact Black neurodivergent students. So, what were your findings? What did you find about this?
You
Like, what
do
do
a
you
better
worry?
job at explaining it from a perspective of the research. I
So,
mean, I wanna highlight the themes, the top themes that we were
Yeah,
able to
yeah.
identify.
So I think, one of the things we were most concerned of is what are the experiences that Black parents are having?
okay.
And we found, that most of the people that we spoke to expressed that they had had pretty frustrating experiences. We had
Mhm,
parents use words like frustrating, overwhelmed, anxious, worried. They're, these words that have a pretty negative connotation
mhm,
around experiences. Now that, there were a few parents who had fairly neutral experiences or positive experiences. And I think it's important to, also point to those outliers as well. But the majority of Black parents that we spoke to did share, that they had really had overwhelmingly difficult, hard experiences with schools. Another thing that we found were the impacts. I mean, so, you take this, and we asked parents. This is one of the things we wanted to know. How does how does advocating and existing within the special education system affect Black parents? We found that a lot of it is around money, right? It's an economic kind of impact in particular because paying for outside services outside of schools, hiring, private tutors, et cetera, to make up for what schools aren't providing, getting, evaluations done that the school could be providing. So the economic impact, the impact on work, having to be called to leave to go get your child, having the time intenseness of this really impacted people professionally.
Mhm.
The other impacts were psychological, the anxiety, the fear. Plenty of parents said, I am afraid to look at my phone when the phone rings, like, because there was
Mm.
anxiety. And part of this is because another thing that we observed was the prevalence of disciplinary use. And this is something we know from research, but these parents, I mean, each parent's story, I would say probably 80%, um, shared stories of suspensions of their
Mm.
multiple times. And so many Black parents had had to deal with the suspension of a child with a disability. Also, I think what is really telling is that for parents whose child hadn't been suspended, it was not because the school hadn't tried, it was because the parent successfully intervened. And I think
Mm.
that is really telling.
Mm. Yeah.
And that speaks to the advocacy
Wow.
piece. The other part, what were the many advocacy strategies that Black parents are using? So whether it's finding information, seeking outside counsel, essentially, whether that is as expertise of interventionists or even legal counsel,
Mhm.
resort often, hiring professional advocates like Miss Poe, working social networks to get information about different kinds of accommodations, recommendations, going to classroom teachers, educating classroom teachers. I mean, I think about one parent who said, "Okay, so, basically I have to educate you on how to take care of my daughter." And that was something that she felt like she felt that she was responsible for that. And so there's this education piece of advocacy, and then working with going to school principals, going to school boards. So I think what is I think one of the things that's important about the many advocacy strategies that Black parents talk with us about is that it really challenges a stereotype of uninvolved Black parents.
Mm.
Exactly.
So I think it's really important that those strategies are uplifted. And
Mm.
for me, thinking about this in a race conscious way, I think about the white administrators and school teachers who need to understand that Black parents are using advocacy strategies with that, in those interactions, and that that's white staff members in schools can better inform themselves about how to support Black parents who are advocating in all these different ways, and making sure that white administrators and classroom teachers recognize that for what it is when it's happening.
Wow.
So we
Instead
Wow.
of being
we
demonized
Mhm.
and their advocacy being weaponized, especially, one of the things that I love too, Catherine, that you talked about and that our report represents. I mean, we had like couples. So that automatically breaks the narrative of, oh, it's just a single black mom. All right.
Mhm.
On my website, because I'm on my Facebook page, I'm constantly having people post when I talk about issues of
Mhm.
what is happening to our Black neurodivergence, of this narrative that still exists, that it's the broken home of the Black family, and that's
Mm.
why these issues exist. We had couples, right?
Right.
And their experiences were the same. So it was really nice to have some data that breaks that myth too.
That's great. Catherine, and Cheryl, I approach this from a I wanna probe a little bit here. I wouldn't say be devil's
Shouldn't be
advocate.
scared.
But here's the thing. I think that there are a couple of things that happen for us
Mhm.
because someone listening to this, in which in my work I've always also thought about and considered the person whose deeply held beliefs will make every excuse for this, right? Because somebody might say, well, this is a couple, but it's a broken couple, right? People, you know what I'm saying? Because that's what happens. That's what happens. It goes around in a circle. How do you think people continue to justify the ongoing? It's a way of thinking. I think also there's a way of our thinking where I think one assumption and mistake we make often is we sometimes endow these folks who do this with a level of capability, you know. that they don't have, right? There is a what's the word that we use? There is a deficiency there, right? And I say that intentionally because we often tend to attribute these deficiencies. We can easily attribute deficiencies to black folks, but not to white folks. Because look, and something I repeat and something I wrote about is this level of not only trauma, but this level of, remember, the whole thing was born out of trauma, right? You're talking about
Exactly.
fighting to get there. But this level of trauma, this level of dislike, this level of hatred, this level of whatever is not born out of something positive, right? I promise you, I've never met someone who is positive and have a positive outlook, who have a great deal of love, who actually do these bad things, right? There's a lot of negative personally happening. That's not to excuse it. I say that because it's important to situate it in the person who thinks, for example, they're racially neutral, right? Because I had a conversation with someone who said during the things that were going on, it was like, well, cops are not like this because X, Y, Z. I was like, well, and I said, you know what? Let me escape into this person's world. Which ones are you referring to? Well, like the ones who lived in my neighborhood was like, oh right, you're all white neighborhood. Well, let's reframe this. If they were in this black neighborhood, right? Because a lot of times it's the problem is whose reality is it situated in? Which reality is it situated in? But oftentimes, one of the way we get around continuously doing things in a cycle is because we discount those realities. And if we discount them, they don't have to exist. They're not a norm. They don't count, right? So I say that all to say, given this situation, right? You've written this report. You have these results. I have two questions here. What is the nature of the type of predispositions that those who are whatever empower the leaders, whoever, with the schools, those who can make this happen, what kind of predisposition would they need to have? Let's talk about character here. All right, because we talk a lot about results, we talk about this effect. I mean, in the end, it boils down to character, because people will do people can make what happen what they want to make happen. And if they were predominant white students, this wouldn't happen like this, right? What is the nature of character that they need to have to receive this information in the most appropriate way to bring about change? What's the character that brings about this type of change, right?
Hmm.
And
And
what's the character that doesn't?
that's a heavily loaded question, and I want to address it in two parts.
Okay.
So, this is like an exploratory kind of theoretical question. But
Yeah.
the reality for me, at least, is being a partnership in this research is I know I can use that information to train my parents or train Black parents or give Black community resources that they don't have. Right.
Like what?
So it's not even about changing the reality of those who have had forever to change that reality.
Okay.
It's like I'm not begging, I'm not asking to sit at your table anymore. I'm not asking you to be anti-racist anymore. I'm not asking you to consider the voices of a population who you already know is most harmed. Instead, I have a resource now that I can use for my community. So my community is no longer the statistical norm of everything negative. So that was my lens, to be honest,
Okay.
going into this. But
Yeah, I
I have to admit that what you're saying has value from a perspective of what I've learned since then, especially when we did the whole presentation, that there's actually more to this report than just that.
understand.
I really came from it from a perspective. I want to teach parents. I want to teach Black advocates.
Okay.
I want to retire. I want to have like 1,000 posts, you know? But now everyone going through all this and with Kathryn's guidance and support and information and all the feedback that we've gotten, like I said, at our event, we had, directors of special education for big school districts there, like two of them there. And one of the things that I didn't realize, which goes to the other part of your question, is how do we get those in education that are making policies, that are giving state money to nonprofits that are supposed to be educating the public, but are only focusing on black and or only focusing on white parents. How do we get them to use this report as a symbol that they failed the
Mm,
Virginia Black Neural community and have to reset and think about what your priorities are to us? That is a question that I don't even want to have to tackle. I don't think I need to have to figure out what they need to buy
mm,
into this.
yeah.
But I get that other people are like, "No, you got to. We gotta get it to the people that need to understand." So, for me, it's like, why try? They know this
Mm,
information. I'd rather get into the hands of the parents, into educators that want to change, right? There's a piece in this that I didn't recognize that if we can get as part of professional development, as into any kind of academic training of general education teachers or special education teachers, that could be where we see a shift. Because if you have the knowledge about this is this experience and just shifting a little bit by doing this, you can reduce that harm caused to Black neurodivergent families. Why wouldn't you do it? So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of how I see it. And I know there's a piece where
awesome.
you got to have your legislators and all those involved. But
Yeah.
my thing is they knew. And one more piece. This time too, like the cycle, this time is extremely powerful though,
Mm,
because the way that Trump has dismantled public education as we rebuild it, right? I'm feeling that this is something that we have to make sure is honored, because for so long, and I can tell you, I've been in those organizations when we push to address the needs of the Black neurodivergent, especially in IDEA or in other policies, we're always told, oh, this isn't a good time. Oh, we're scared of creating bad law. No, no, no. All of these excuses, right? So now it's like, you know what? We don't need you. We're just going to do it. And if the parents are well trained and can do it themselves and they can lobby together and we develop our own table and we take care of our own, I feel that that is where we're at this point.
well, and I appreciate that.
And I think I would say a couple of things. I mean, I love this question and all the things that you like kind of laid out for us, Catherine, and ways to think about this. And I guess what I would add is that, I see what you're saying about assuming expertise that is not there. And it makes me think about teacher education programs and that oftentimes it's only one class that a teacher might get on special education, one
Mm,
class on classroom management, right? I think there's probably so much work to be done on
mm,
on the preparation side of this. Um, and all of it would still have to address racism and racial bias and the way that it shows up in these micro moments that have
mhm,
power to define, an entire interaction. So I think there is something about the professional. There's just not a lot of exposure and preparation programs to a skill set around
mhm,
communication, around identification, around classroom management, etc.
mhm,
And I think there is a lot of there I mean, I just think back to interactions I saw in classrooms when I was, sitting and observing in the back of classrooms, what I would see. And there is so much about those tiny moments that I think educators, and particularly white educators, I would ask them, I would say this. I would say to them, look at for 1 week, for 7 days, notice who you call on in your class by race. Just do that.
mhm,
Track who you call on in your classroom by race, and let's look at those patterns together. And if all
mhm,
is white kids in your class, then we need to talk about that too. And there are these ways that I firsthand saw all the time, these moments, where that bias would come through, where a black child would be so eager to answer a question in class, and that teacher would not even look a second at them, and would
mm,
call it a white child. And so, I mean, yes, there's professional expertise that's not there, but there's so much of this that is baked into white mindset, whiteness, white ideology, just the way that my people, are socialized to overlook, to not recognize.
mhm,
And that maybe that's professional development. I think that that comes having to really recognize and unlearn that and become aware of it. So that reflects
Mhm.
peace. I mean, this has been what so many of us have been talking about for so long now.
Yeah.
Piece that I definitely want to address too is that I ultimately think that character is a convenient scapegoat.
Mm. I was thinking that too. Thank you. Absolutely.
As much as, I like that, "Oh, people are good people," I really do believe, and I think a good amount of social psychology would stand with me on this, that
Mhm.
people are the product of nature and nurture.
Mm.
It's not character. Yes, maybe some of us are more inclined to have, a certain, the big 5 personality traits or something, although I've heard those are not very reliable. What
White
about
centered. There
morality?
was a white lens that developed it. Let's just make sure we add that.
Is a scapegoat. I think that the maybe morality, but I'm sure there are this might get me in hot water. I'm sure there are some very, sort of high self-appraising moral white people who participate in anti-black racism all day.
Every day.
Morality, I don't know. But what I
Okay.
do think matters is political power. And
Mm.
I think matters. And so that's why I definitely agree with Cheryl that, the goal of getting this information in the hands of parents who can advocate for themselves. And I think specifically to Black parents, but also when I think about like my own people, I think about white people in school buildings who witness injustice and are silent. We have our own organizing and speaking out and allying and to be learning about and to be doing about building political power in a building because oftentimes, what I saw in that effective needs center that I walked into, that the fact that they had the youngest, most junior teacher in that classroom also meant that she was probably the least empowered in their school hierarchy
Mhm.
to actually say
Yeah.
this is wrong because she was
Mhm.
Mhm.
fired,
Yep.
right?
Right.
When you talk about like the economic intersection of this,
Mhm.
have to learn how to build power to challenge civil rights injustice, in their school buildings, in
Mhm.
school districts, because many times we are privy to rooms that are locked and can see things that others cannot and that, Black parents may not know about. And so I think that's an important piece too. So I do think it comes back to political power. Political pressure moves things. Community organizing groups who have been fighting this fight are an example of that.
Mm.
Kathryn, you prompted a story that I remember doing an observation too, just about how and and I don't even know is it morality? I think it's racism, and I don't know where racism fits in with the characteristics with your character or your morality. Because there was this white teacher, just like you said, it was an inclusion special education class. Two white teachers, general ed, special ed. I was sitting in the back, doing an observation, and they were discussing Hamlet, and the black kid raised his hand, larger black male, answered the question saying that Hamlet and Brutus were stick men. She
We're what?
literally stick men, they were buddies. Men, like he used his language to say
Mhm.
friends, and she
Mhm.
scolded him. But then the white kid that she called on said, "Oh yeah, they were friends." She praised him, and the black kid's like, "What? What?" So there also needs to be a sense of understanding the different dialects of the
Mhm.
student that you're
Right.
working with. That because he was a stick man means a friend, right? What a great opportunity if she did know to clarify and say, "Hey, can you elaborate and tell me what you mean
Mhm.
by that?" Then
I was
he would
about
have
to
been able to
say.
say, "Oh, they were like buddies hanging out." That would have given her information. He would have felt engaged. He would have felt that his what he had to say, how he had to say it could be clarified so that it met the standard of this white setting. I mean,
Mhm.
like, what does it take to get them to think like that? I don't know, but that's what we
Yeah.
need for them to go
Right.
beyond just scolding.
Yeah.
What's that called?
Just say that I know for my own people, as a white woman from Dayton, Ohio, right? I saw segregation and I saw that there was something not right about what was going on. I did not have the language for it. It took getting an education on a basic vocabulary, a basic racial literacy, to begin to track these things, to be form
Mhm.
a proactively race conscious lens.
Mhm.
And I do think that the work I got to do with my own people is around education. There's no other way around it for us. Like
Right.
we just regularly, I mean, it's not, unless you're coming up through a family, where there is a sort of multicultural, cross-cultural racial literacy. They say that white families are some of the most segregated and self-segregating. So
Mhm.
that probably lends to a dispositional aspect over.
Yeah, that's partly also what I was thinking because it reminds me of a conversation I was having with a friend. I've had several white female friends who a lot of times I see how they're treated by their brothers, for example, right? And I look at them and I say, "Wow, if your brother's treating you like that, what hope do I have in this world as a black woman?" And one of my friends said, "No, he's afraid of the law." And so I thought, wow. So the only thing that separates, you know, that behavior from that, even towards me, is the fact that there is a law protecting me from evil, right? What happens if this law goes? So will everything fall apart? Will morality, everything just fall apart?
Yes.
And so that for me was really those are kind of along the lines that I think of because I do talk to a lot of people and I do have access to a lot of people, but I think about the fact that and I understand, Shara, where you're coming from because I was pretty much coming from the same place even as an academician, um thinking, well, I guess I have to create whatever it is, right? And in this case, I work on curricular work. And well, one of the things I also saw even as a teacher is, you know, if you're within this system, sometimes you're somebody, right? You're different. You're a different person in this system than outside of this system sometimes, right? And to be the same person inside and outside means that you're going to have to probably endure some trauma or eventually might have to get out of it because going against the grain, right? Because the system sets it up in that way. And Catherine, what you said, has happened over and over again. You put the least empowered person, I've seen it too. You put least experienced and empowered person in that position because, they're least likely to be to speak up, right? They're least likely um to have the courage at the time, right? Especially when you're young and things like that. And if you do have the courage to speak up, then it might be repercussions as well. And so I always have to think about this, and I tend to think about this because of everything that's going on as well. How do I wonder now what it's going to be replaced by, right? What's replacing it? Something that resembles something that resembles the past and the present kind of thing. Like what
Yes.
kind of
I mean, really, I
predisposition?
mean, the way that it's moving, it is going to the past. Giving funding for private schools, white flight again, even though it's been happening all along, it's going to happen even more so. The idea of how the U.S. Department of Education has been gutted that does limit protections that Black neurodivergence really were counting on through Office of Civil Rights to make sure that those kinds of things were covered. I fear like I too fear what it'll look like this time next year with how IDEA is being manipulated and used as a power play in this current administration. However, I go back to the idea of Black people, in my opinion, need to stop depending on the systems to determine how our children are going to be educated, right? So we know all this stuff is coming and happening. What are we doing now to prepare for it? And I think this research is a very viable option because even part of when we did our presentation, Black families are starting to say homeschooling is an option that I can consider, right? you know, co-ops are options that we can start considering. So even like I just see a connection around actually what is happening now with the US Department of Education, what things may not be available for our families, what we already know is an issue, and opting out is an option. But then also pushing back in is also an option once you have what you know you need. Because they can't get rid of IDEA. Trump cannot get rid of IDA without going through Congress. And I don't believe Congress is ever going to allow that to happen. So as long as the parents know what their regulatory rights are and they're not scared of using those particular rights, sorry about that. It's we just gotta be creative.
Mhm.
Be creative. If we know money's gonna be available for private schools, then we need to develop private schools here too for us that represent our needs. Like in Virginia, where I live, there's not all of the schools that are big private schools, they're not run with a Black lens. They're not even well integrated. I mean, to be
Mhm.
honest, they're
Yeah.
very segregated. Um, I think we have one school that Pharrell's done, in Norfolk, and I don't think he takes special ed kids. I'm
Mm.
not sure about that.
Mm.
So I think it's an opportunity for the community to go back to, like the Panthers idea. If we can't trust the government to do it right, we need to develop community and resources and supports that allow us to
Absolutely.
do it for ourselves.
Wow.
That would be exciting to me in just so many ways.
That is exciting, and that is what I do. I can't wait to share. So I'll be sharing out soon some work that I've done recently and implemented with homeschoolers.
Excellent.
I had homeschooled my son, for a short time. But
I would definitely homeschool my children if they were in school now. They'd be in a
mm,
homeschool program. I would not send them in the public ed right now. So
yeah.
I love the idea of homeschooling and those little small co-ops and those
Mhm.
little micro schools. I mean, there are opportunities there for the Black neurodivergent community that I think putting up and putting in front of Black folks is important because that's not really a conversation we have in our community. I mean,
Mm.
growing up, when I thought of homeschool, was like, oh, the white hippie lady down the street, you know?
Mhm.
That kind of was always the idea of who homeschooled or super religious,
Mhm.
people. But never, I did not even know Black people homeschooled until about 5 years ago, to be
Yeah,
honest. 5
the large
years.
homeschooling population. I'll
Yeah, there's a
definitely
lot.
share this. I think some of your findings resonate with a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a thing, wasn't it? That was one of the things some parents talked about either moving from one district to the next or
Mhm.
pulling their children out to homeschool.
So, well, any last takeaways? Any last takeaways? What do you want people to know? What do you think is important for them to leave here knowing? I do appreciate that both of you joined today,
Thank you for having it.
Discussion.
Well, yeah.
but what are
I
some
think for me, I just want to really, how much I enjoyed the participatory, resource what is it, research? I wasn't really familiar or understanding that that was a thing, so the opportunity to work in collaboration with
Mhm.
the university and Kathryn was just a wonderful experience, and I hope that other universities will kinda do the same thing because what a wonderful way to get information about anything by actually talking and engaging with the source or the people that are, trying to help the source. So I think that was very, very exciting. I just want to, thank Dr. Wiley and Howard University for the opportunity to do a project that is my passion, that is, my life's work, and having an opportunity to represent Black neurodivergence in a way that white society usually doesn't allow us to have space for.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I love what this project has created and how it has really brought people together. I think that, that for me as a researcher, I do believe this is the kind of work that those of us in universities can and should be doing and bringing our
Mhm.
students up through like the next generation. to be able
Mhm.
to see that this is what it can be. Um,
Absolutely.
I am just so grateful to be on the journey of this project, and to be
Mhm.
able to learn from Cheryl. Ooh, it's gonna get me. Our weekly meetings are, we just have so it is so enjoyable, and it's been such a defining project for me personally, and has really, I think, let me, you know, pursue the things that weigh on me. It's allowed me an opportunity to bring justice in the ways that I can, um, now. So I
Yeah.
really appreciated it, and seeing our students just thrive through the project and see what advocacy can look like, and learn how the policies work, and who are so inspired by the work that Cheryl does. And I gotta say, I mean, when you talk to folks about Cheryl, she's famous.
It's infamous, but maybe not famous.
Parents parents know her, school districts are afraid of her. I mean, it's just she is the person to know. So it is truly
Awesome.
a gift, to even be on the journey with the project.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
So you all are the perfect example of, considering it that the community needs the academicians and the academicians need the community, right? There's so much to learn from each other if we really want to make meaningful change. And I think it's important for even those who are in charge to realize that you're not going to get these effectively done without the people, right? You really aren't, no matter what you do. It's it's like any business, right? You do a market analysis if you want to be effective, and it really depends on what your goals are. If your goals are to do more of the same, if your goals are to make it look like you're doing something that you're not, or if your goal is to, oh, let me continue to be ineffective because I don't really want things to change, but I want it to be the same, then you're going to use the same old approach, which excludes the rights holders and the stakeholders who are involved in the process. And I applaud you both for just coming together and
Thank you.
Mm, and I want to say not being afraid to hear what each other has to say, because there is a lot of fear involved in hearing. And I can't help it. I know we're going to end soon, but I have to make one more comment when you said for people to admit, yes, this is where I failed. I don't think that's going to happen. But I
We
mean,
can wish. We can dream.
there's a great deal of fear with shame, right? And failure usually and shame are very synonymous. And oftentimes, the antidote is the opposite. They'll have to have the courage to involve you, and not use fear as an excuse to make nothing happen, right? It's Look, I know this is not meant to be religious, but I keep coming back to this. I always used to think, I wonder why does the book of Revelation say, the fearful will will burn or whatever? And I started real, oh, that's what happens. That's what happens. The cowardly, that's the word they use, the cowardly. The cowardice really does a lot of damage, doesn't it? And what shouldn't be used as an excuse. But anything else to add before I end?
I mean, that
Thank you.
yes, this is a time, yes, that really resonates. Yes. So, thank you, Catherine. Dr. Quinlan.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for getting this story out. Like that means a lot to us because the more
Yeah.
people that know about it.
Well, it
So
means a
thank
lot to me that you guys took the time to join me
you.
and to join my show, to be honest. So thank you both. I do appreciate it. Um, so
Bye.
if you
How do you end? I don't know.
so if you like this episode, please like it and follow so you can listen to the next set of episodes for Learning for Truth and Love. Thanks for joining.